Hello everyone. Today, we will practice listening and speaking skills with the lazy farmer topic. The story teaches us about hard work, responsibility, and the consequences of laziness. Now, let's begin our listening and speaking practice. Chapter 1, Meet Fred the Lazy Farmer. The sun was very high in the sky. It was a hot day on the farm. Most farmers were already working hard in their fields. But not Fred. Fred was still in bed. Fred was a farmer. He had a farm. But Fred was not like other farmers. Fred was a very lazy farmer. He liked to sleep. He liked to eat. He liked to do nothing. Working was not his favorite thing. Not at all. Fred's house was small and a little old. The paint on the walls was coming off. The roof had some holes. Around the house, the grass was very long. Flowers were trying to grow, but the weeds were bigger. It looked like no one cared for the garden. And that was true. Fred did not care. His farm was called Sunny Meadow Farm. But it was not very sunny or like a meadow anymore. The fields were full of weeds. Tall, yellow weeds and prickly green weeds grew everywhere. Where Fred should have planted vegetables, there were just weeds. It was a sad sight. Fred had some animals on his farm. He had chickens, a pig, a cow, and a sheep. The chickens walked around a muddy yard. Their feathers were dirty. The pig lived in a pen that was smelly and messy. The cow stood in a field with very little grass to eat. The sheep was in a field with even less grass. The animals looked sad and thin. Inside his house, Fred was waking up very slowly. He opened one eye, then the other. He looked at the clock next to his bed. "Oh, no," he said. "It's already 10 o'clock. But Fred did not jump out of bed fast. No. He stayed in bed. He stretched his arms and legs very slowly. He yawned a big yawn. "Another 5 minutes," he said to himself. And he closed his eyes again. 5 minutes became 10 minutes. 10 minutes became 15 minutes. Fred was very good at sleeping. Finally, Fred got out of bed. He put on his old clothes. He did not wash his face or brush his teeth. Too much work, he thought. He went to the kitchen. The kitchen was also messy. Dirty dishes were in the sink. Flies buzzed around a bowl of old fruit on the table. Fred opened the cupboard. It was almost empty. He found a small piece of bread. It was dry and hard. "This will do," Fred said. He ate the dry bread very slowly. He did not even put butter or jam on it. Too much work. After breakfast, Fred sat down in his old armchair. He looked out the window. He saw his farm. He saw the weeds, the dirty animals, the broken fence. "Oh well," Fred said. "It's a farm. Farms are supposed to look like that." He closed his eyes again. He almost fell asleep in his armchair. Suddenly, he heard a noise. Cluck, cluck, cluck. It was the chickens. They were making a lot of noise. Moo, moo. That was the cow. She sounded unhappy. Oink, oink. The pig was also making noise. And even the sheep, baa, baa, was joining in. Fred opened his eyes again. "What's all that noise?" he grumbled. He went to the door and looked outside. The animals were all looking at him. They really looked unhappy. But Fred just sighed. "Animals always make noise," he said. He went back inside and sat down again. He did not do anything to help the animals. He was just too lazy. This was Fred, the lazy farmer. His farm was waiting for him, but Fred was just sitting still. Chapter 2, The Hungry Animals. The sun got hotter and hotter. The animals were getting more and more unhappy. They were also very, very hungry. The chickens were pecking at the ground, but there was not much to find. Usually, Fred threw them corn every morning, but today, Fred had forgotten. Or maybe he didn't forget. Maybe he just didn't want to. The chickens were tired of eating dirt. Cluck, 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 they cried loudly. Food. We want food. The pig, whose name was Penelope, was in her pen. Her pen was muddy and dirty. Usually, Fred gave her leftover food and some pig food. But today, her food bowl was empty. Penelope's tummy was rumbling. Oink, 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 she squealed. Hungry. I am so hungry. She pushed her nose against the fence of her pen, looking at Fred's house, hoping he would see her and bring food. The cow, Daisy, stood in the field. The field was dry and brown. There was hardly any green grass left. Daisy usually ate fresh green grass all day long. But today, there was nothing good to eat. Her stomach felt empty. Moo, 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 Daisy bellowed sadly. No grass. Give me grass. She looked towards Fred's house too, with big, sad eyes. The sheep, Sean, was also in a field with very little grass. He was a fluffy white sheep. But now his wool was getting dusty from the dry field. Sean was a quiet sheep, but even he was getting upset. His stomach grumbled loudly. Bah, bah, Sean mumbled weakly. Food. Please. Food. The animals looked at each other. They were all hungry. They were all unhappy. And they were all looking towards Fred's house. They knew Fred was inside. They had seen him through the window. But Fred was not coming out. He was not bringing them food. He was not cleaning their homes. He was just staying inside, being lazy. The chickens started to talk to each other. Cluck, cluck. This is terrible, said a small brown chicken. Fred is so lazy. Cluck, cluck. He never feeds us on time, agreed a big white chicken. And our yard is so muddy. Penelope the pig heard the chickens. Oink, oink. Tell me about it. She grunted. My pen is a mess. And I am starving. Daisy the cow mooed loudly. Moo. It's the same for me. This field is empty. I need fresh grass. Sean the sheep spoke softly. Bah. We need water too. He was very thirsty as well as hungry. The animals all looked at each other again. They knew they had to do something. They could not stay hungry and thirsty all day. They had to make Fred understand. But how could they do that? Fred was inside and he didn't seem to care about anything. Suddenly, the big white chicken had an idea. Cluck. I know what we can do, she said loudly. We can all make noise together. Very, very loud noise. Maybe then Fred will hear us. The other animals liked this idea. It was worth trying. So, they all started making noise together. The chickens clucked and squawked. The pig oinked and squealed. The cow mooed and bellowed. The sheep baa and bleated. They made the loudest, most unhappy animal noise you could ever imagine. They hoped Fred would hear them. They hoped Fred would finally understand that they needed his help. They were the hungry, neglected animals of the lazy farmer. Chapter 3, The Talking Scarecrow. Inside his house, Fred was trying to take a nap in his armchair. But it was very hard to sleep. The noise from the animals was so loud. Cluck. Oink. Moo. Baa. It was like a noisy animal band playing outside his window. "Oh, be quiet," Fred shouted. But the animals did not stop. They kept making even more noise. Fred put his hands over his ears. "This is terrible," he said. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't relax. He had to do something. Slowly, Fred got up from his armchair. He walked to the door and opened it a little bit. He peeked outside. He saw all the animals making noise. "What is wrong with you all?" Fred asked in a grumpy voice. "Why are you so noisy?" The animals stopped making noise for a moment. They looked at Fred. The big white chicken stepped forward. "Cluck. We are hungry, Fred," she said. "You have not given us food today." Fred blinked. Did he just hear the chicken talk? "Chickens don't talk," he said to himself quietly. Maybe he was still dreaming. Penelope the pig oinked loudly. "Oink. And my pen is a mess, Fred. Clean it up." Fred's eyes got wider. The pig was talking too. This was getting very strange. Daisy the cow mooed sadly. "Moo. There is no grass left in my field. I am hungry." Shaun the sheep purred softly. "Baa. And we all need water." Fred stared at the animals. They were all talking. And they were all talking to him. He rubbed his eyes. "Am I really awake?" he wondered. Suddenly, Fred saw something else strange. In the middle of his neglected vegetable field, there was a scarecrow. Usually, scarecrows just stood still and scared away birds. But this scarecrow was moving. It was waving its arms. And, was it smiling? The scarecrow took a step forward. Then another step. It was walking. Scarecrows don't walk, do they? Fred was very confused. The scarecrow walked towards Fred. It had a straw hat on its head and old clothes. Its face was made of cloth with stitches for eyes and mouth. But it looked friendly. "Hello, Fred," the scarecrow said in a voice that sounded like dry leaves rustling in the wind. Fred jumped back in surprise. "A talking scarecrow," he gasped. "This is impossible." The scarecrow chuckled, a dry, rustling chuckle. "Nothing is impossible on a farm, Fred. Especially if the farmer is as relaxed as you." Fred frowned. "Relaxed? I am not relaxed. I am resting." The scarecrow smiled again. "Resting for too long, Fred. Your animals are hungry. Your farm is a mess. You need to work." Fred crossed his arms. "Work is hard. I don't like hard work." "But hard work is good, Fred," the scarecrow said kindly. "It is good for you, and it is good for your farm. Look at your animals. They need you." The scarecrow pointed to the hungry animals. They were all looking at Fred and the scarecrow. "They are always okay," Fred mumbled. "They always manage." "Manage?" the scarecrow repeated. "Is that how you want your farm to be? Just managing? A good farm is full of life and growth. It gives back to you when you care for it." Fred looked around at his weedy fields and his sad animals. Maybe the scarecrow was right. Maybe his farm was not very good. But work was still hard. "But what should I do?" Fred asked the scarecrow. "I don't even know where to start." The scarecrow smiled. "Start with the animals, Fred. Give them food and water. Clean their homes. They will thank you for it." Fred looked at the animals again. They were still watching him. Their eyes seemed to be saying, "Please, Fred, help us." Maybe, just maybe, Fred should listen to the talking scarecrow and the hungry animals. Maybe it was time for the lazy farmer to do some work. But Fred was still lazy. He needed a clever plan. And he had an idea. A lazy farmer's idea. Chapter 4, Fred's Clever Plan. Fred was a farmer. He had a farm. But Fred was not like other farmers. Fred was lazy. Very lazy. He liked to sleep late. He liked to eat snacks. He did not like to work hard. Fred's farm was small. He had some chickens. He had some pigs. He had a field for growing corn and vegetables. But the farm did not look good. The chicken coop was messy. The pig pen was muddy. The field had many weeds. One sunny morning, Fred woke up late. The sun was high in the sky. "Oh no," Fred said. "I am late. I have much work to do." He looked out at his farm. He saw the weeds in his field. "I need to pull out the weeds," Fred thought. "But pulling weeds is hard work. It takes a long time. And it makes my back hurt." Fred sat down on a big rock. He scratched his head. He thought and thought. "I need a clever plan," he said to himself. "A lazy plan to pull weeds." He looked around his farm. He saw his chickens. The chickens were walking around, pecking at the ground. An idea popped into Fred's head. "Chickens," he said. "Chickens like to eat weeds. I can use the chickens to pull the weeds." Fred smiled. He thought his plan was very clever. He went to the chicken coop. He opened the door. "Chickens, chickens, come here," Fred called. The chickens came running. They clucked and looked at Fred. Fred pointed to the field with weeds. "Chickens," Fred said slowly and loudly, "I want you to eat all the weeds in the field. Eat them all. It is your job." The chickens looked at Fred. Then they looked at the field. Then they looked at each other. They clucked again. They did not understand Fred. Chickens do not understand farmer talk about jobs and weeds. Fred thought the chickens understood. "Good chickens," Fred said. "Now go. Eat those weeds." He gently pushed the chickens towards the field. The chickens walked into the field. They pecked at the ground. But they did not eat the weeds. They ate small bugs in the dirt. They ate some seeds on the ground. They scratched the dirt with their feet. They made the field even messier. They did not eat the big, green weeds. Weeds are not tasty for chickens. Fred watched the chickens from his rock. He waited and waited. He thought the weeds would disappear. But the weeds were still there. And now the field had more chicken footprints. Fred frowned. "This plan is not working," he said. "Chickens are not good weed pullers," he sighed. "I need another clever plan." He looked at his pig pen. The pigs were rolling in the mud. They were making loud snorting noises. Another idea came to Fred. "Pigs," he said. "Pigs like to dig in the dirt. Pigs can dig out the weeds." Fred smiled again. He thought this plan was even cleverer than the chicken plan. He went to the pig pen. "Pigs, pigs, come here," Fred shouted. The pigs came to the fence. They grunted and looked at Fred with their small eyes. Fred pointed to the field of weeds. "Pigs," Fred said slowly and loudly again, "I want you to dig up all the weeds in the field. Dig them all up. It is your job." The pigs grunted. They pushed against each other. They sniffed the air. They did not understand Fred either. Pigs understand food talk, mud talk, and maybe sleep talk. But not weed-pulling job talk. Fred thought the pigs understood him. "Good pigs," Fred said. "Now go. Dig up those weeds." He opened the pig pen gate. He hoped the pigs would run to the field and start digging. The pigs did run out. But they did not run to the field of weeds. They ran to Fred's vegetable garden. Fred had carrots, tomatoes, and lettuce in his garden. Pigs love vegetables. The pigs ran into the garden. They started to dig. But they did not dig up weeds. They dug up carrots. They dug up tomatoes. They dug up lettuce. They ate the vegetables. They rolled in the vegetable plants. They made a big mess. Fred watched from his rock. His eyes opened wide. "No. No. Pigs. Stop," Fred shouted. He ran to the garden. He waved his arms. He tried to chase the pigs away. But pigs are fast and strong. And these pigs were hungry for vegetables. They ate and dug and rolled. It was a vegetable party for the pigs. Finally, Fred got the pigs out of the garden. But it was too late. His vegetable garden was ruined. The carrots were gone. The tomatoes were squashed. The lettuce was muddy. And the field of weeds still had weeds. Maybe even more weeds now because of the chickens' footprints. Fred stood in his ruined garden. He looked at the mess. He looked at the weeds. He looked at the pigs happily eating leftover lettuce. He sighed a very big sigh. Chickens are not weed pullers. Pigs are not weed pullers, Fred said sadly. And clever plans are not always good plans. Maybe I have to pull the weeds myself. Oh no. That is hard work. Fred sat back down on his rock. He felt tired and sad. His clever plans did not work. Now he had more mess and no vegetables. Being lazy was harder than he thought. He still had to deal with the weeds, and now his garden was ruined too. This lazy day was not very relaxing after all. Chapter 5: The Wise Old Neighbor. The next day, Fred woke up. He did not sleep late today. He felt unhappy about his farm. He felt unhappy about his lazy plans. He knew he had to do something about the weeds. He walked to his field. The weeds were taller now. They looked even bigger and greener. Fred sighed. He started to pull a weed. It was hard work. The weed's roots were deep in the ground. Fred pulled and pulled. Finally, the weeds came out. But Fred's back hurt a little. He pulled another weed. And another. And another. Slowly, Fred was pulling weeds. The sun was getting hotter. Fred was getting tired. Sweat was on his face. He stopped to rest. Just then, he heard a voice. "Hello there, Fred." Fred looked up. He saw his neighbor. His neighbor was Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson was an old man. He had white hair and kind eyes. He was a wise farmer. He had a big, beautiful farm next to Fred's farm. Everyone in town knew Mr. Thompson was a good farmer. And a good man. "Hello, Mr. Thompson," Fred said. He felt a little bit ashamed. Mr. Thompson's farm was always neat and tidy. Fred's farm was not neat and tidy. Mr. Thompson smiled. "Pulling weeds, Fred?" he asked. "Yes," Fred said. "It is hard work." Mr. Thompson nodded. "Yes, farming is work. sometimes hard work. He looked at Fred's field. He saw many weeds. He also saw some chicken footprints and pig tracks. He did not say anything about that. He was a kind neighbor. "You know, Fred," Mr. Thompson said gently, "there is a better way to pull weeds than just pulling." Fred's ears perked up. "A better way? Easier way?" Fred asked hopefully. Maybe Mr. Thompson had a new clever plan. Mr. Thompson chuckled. "Not exactly easier, Fred. But better. Come with me." Mr. Thompson walked towards his own farm. Fred, a little curious, followed him. Mr. Thompson led Fred to his vegetable garden. It was a beautiful garden. The soil was dark and rich. The plants were green and healthy. There were no weeds. Everything grew in neat rows. It looked like a picture in a book. "Look here, Fred," Mr. Thompson said. He pointed to the soil around his tomato plants. "See this?" Fred looked. He saw loose soil. The soil was soft and crumbly. "Yes," Fred said. "Soil." Mr. Thompson smiled. "Yes, soil. But this soil is happy soil." Fred blinked. Happy soil? He did not understand. Soil cannot be happy. Soil is just dirt, right? Mr. Thompson explained. When soil is loose like this, weeds do not grow as easily. And when weeds do start to grow, they are easy to pull. See? Mr. Thompson gently touched a tiny weed near a tomato plant. The small weed came out of the ground easily. Roots and all. "Wow," Fred said. "That weed came out so easily. My weeds are hard to pull." "That is because your soil is hard and dry, Fred," Mr. Thompson said. "Hard soil is good for weeds. Soft soil is good for vegetables. And not so good for weeds." Mr. Thompson showed Fred how he took care of his soil. He used a tool called a hoe. It was a long stick with a flat metal part at the end. Mr. Thompson showed Fred how to use the hoe to gently loosen the soil around the plants. "Like this, Fred," Mr. Thompson said. He carefully moved the hoe in the soil. The soil became loose and soft. This is called cultivating the soil. It helps the plants grow. And it makes it harder for weeds to grow. Fred watched Mr. Thompson. He tried to copy him with his own hands, moving his fingers in the air like a hoe. It looked not too hard. Not as hard as pulling big weeds with his bare hands anyway. And, Mr. Thompson continued, when you see small weeds just starting to grow, you can use the hoe to cut them down. Like this. Mr. Thompson showed Fred how to use the hoe to cut small weeds at the surface of the soil. If you do this regularly, the weeds will not get big and strong. Fred was starting to understand. It was not just about pulling weeds when they were big. It was about making it harder for weeds to grow in the first place. And dealing with them when they are small and easy to manage. Mr. Thompson smiled. Farming is not just about hard work, Fred. It is about smart work. Working with nature, not against it. He pointed to his garden again. Look at this garden, Fred. It is beautiful, yes. But it is not just beautiful. It is alive. It is full of life. The plants are growing, the bees are buzzing, the worms are working in the soil. It is a wonderful thing to be part of. Fred looked at Mr. Thompson's garden. He saw the busy bees flying from flower to flower. He saw a ladybug walking on a tomato leaf. He thought about the worms in the soil, making it soft and good for plants. He had never thought about farming like this before. He had only thought about work. Hard, tiring work that he did not want to do. When you work with nature, Fred, Mr. Thompson said, it is not just work. It is joyful. You see things grow. You help things grow. You are part of something bigger than yourself. Mr. Thompson picked a ripe red tomato from a plant. He gave it to Fred. Here, Fred. Taste this. Fred took the tomato. It was warm from the sun. It smelled sweet and fresh. He took a bite. The tomato was juicy and delicious. It tasted like sunshine and summer. It tasted amazing. Wow, Fred said. This tomato is so good. It tastes much better than the tomatoes I buy in the store. Mr. Thompson chuckled. Of course, Fred. This tomato grew in happy soil, with sunshine and rain and love. Everything tastes better when you grow it yourself. Fred ate the rest of the tomato. He thought about Mr. Thompson's words. Happy soil. Smart work. Joyful farming. Growing things yourself. Maybe farming was not just hard work after all. Maybe it could be something different. Something good. Thank you, Mr. Thompson, Fred said. For the tomato. And for showing me about happy soil. And smart work. Mr. Thompson smiled kindly. You are welcome, Fred. Why don't you borrow my hoe? Try cultivating your field. Start with a small part. See how it goes. Mr. Thompson went to his shed and brought out a hoe. He gave it to Fred. It was a little heavy, but Fred could hold it. Try it, Fred, Mr. Thompson said. I think you might enjoy it. Fred looked at the hoe. He looked at his weedy field. He looked back at Mr. Thompson's beautiful garden. Maybe Mr. Thompson was right. Maybe there was something to this smart work and happy soil idea. Maybe Fred would try to be a little less lazy. Just a little bit. Starting today. Chapter 6, Fred tries hard work. Fred took the hoe from Mr. Thompson. It felt a bit heavy and awkward in his hands. He had never used a hoe before. He usually tried to avoid farm tools altogether. Tools meant work. And Fred liked to avoid work. But today was different. Mr. Thompson's words were in his head. Smart work. Happy soil. Joyful farming. And that delicious tomato. Fred wanted to grow tomatoes like that. Maybe, just maybe, working hard could be worth it. Fred walked back to his weedy field. He picked a small corner of the field to start with. He did not want to do the whole field at once. That would be too much work. Baby steps, Fred thought. Baby steps to not being lazy. He looked at the hoe again. He remembered what Mr. Thompson had shown him. Gently loosen the soil. Cut the small weeds. Work with nature, not against it. Fred took a deep breath. He put the metal part of the hoe on the soil. He pushed. He pulled. He tried to move the hoe. Chapter 7, The Harvest Festival. The sun was warm. It kissed Fred's face as he walked through his fields. The day was almost over. Tomorrow was the Harvest Festival. Fred looked around his farm. He smiled a little. Wow, he said to himself. Look at all of this. He saw big, round pumpkins. They were orange and heavy. He saw tall corn stalks. The corn was yellow and ready. He saw red tomatoes. They were juicy and plump. He saw green beans hanging on the plants. They were long and full. Just a few months ago, Fred's farm was very different. It was messy. Weeds grew everywhere. The plants were small and weak. Fred was. Well, Fred was lazy. He liked to sleep late. He liked to sit in the shade. He did not like to work hard. But things changed. Something inside Fred woke up. He started to work. He pulled weeds. He watered his plants. He talked to his animals. He worked a little bit more each day. It was not easy. Fred still liked to rest. But he worked more than he rested. Now, looking at his farm, Fred felt good. Really good. He touched a big pumpkin. "You are big," he whispered to the pumpkin. He picked a red tomato. He smelled it. "So sweet," he said. He walked to the cornfield. The corn stalks were taller than him. He pulled an ear of corn. It was full of yellow kernels. "Good job, corn," Fred chuckled. Fred thought about the harvest festival. Every year, the village had a festival to celebrate the harvest. Farmers brought their best fruits and vegetables. There were games and music. People laughed and ate good food. This year, Fred wanted to join the festival. He wanted to show his vegetables. He wanted to see what people thought of his farm. He wanted to feel like part of the village. "Tomorrow is the day," Fred said to his cow, Daisy. Daisy mooed softly. Fred patted Daisy's head. "Tomorrow we go to the festival." Fred felt a little bit nervous. He never really cared about the festival before. He was always too lazy to prepare. But this year was different. This year he worked hard. This year he had something to show. He walked back to his small house. The sun was going down. The sky was orange and pink. Fred felt tired in a good way. He was tired because he worked. He was happy because he worked. He was excited for tomorrow. He was going to the harvest festival, and he was ready. The sun woke Fred up early. He jumped out of bed. He felt full of energy. Today was the harvest festival. He went outside. The air was fresh and cool. The birds were singing. It was a beautiful morning. First, Fred went to his pumpkin patch. He looked at all the pumpkins. He wanted to choose the best ones. He picked 3 pumpkins. They were big and round and a bright orange color. He lifted them carefully. They were heavy. "These are good pumpkins," Fred said. Next, he went to his tomato plants. He picked the reddest tomatoes. He chose the ones that were perfectly round. He filled a basket with tomatoes. They smelled so fresh. "Perfect tomatoes," he said. Then, he went to his cornfield. He picked some ears of corn. He chose the biggest and yellowest ones. He peeled back the green leaves a little bit. The kernels inside were plump and juicy. "Festival corn," Fred exclaimed. He also picked some green beans. He chose the longest and straightest beans. He put them in a bag. "Good-looking beans," he thought. Fred wanted his vegetables and fruits to look their best at the festival. He took them to his house. He got a big bucket of water. He gently washed each pumpkin. He washed each tomato. He washed each ear of corn and each green bean. He used a soft cloth to dry them. He rubbed them until they shined a little. He wanted them to look perfect. He found some nice baskets. He put the pumpkins in one big basket. He put the tomatoes in a smaller basket. He put the corn in another basket. He tied the bag of green beans neatly. Fred stepped back and looked at his harvest. The pumpkins were big and bright. The tomatoes were red and shiny. The corn was yellow and plump. The green beans were long and straight. Everything looked so good. Fred smiled. He felt proud. He worked hard to grow these vegetables and fruits. And now, they were ready for the festival. He was ready to show everyone what he had grown. He ate a quick breakfast of bread and cheese. He drank some milk from Daisy the cow. He felt strong and ready for the day. "Okay, vegetables," Fred said to his baskets. "Let's go to the festival." He carefully lifted the baskets and the bag. He was ready to go and share his harvest with the village. He was excited for a fun day at the harvest festival. Fred walked to the village square. It was not very far from his farm. But the baskets were heavy. He walked slowly and carefully. He didn't want to drop his vegetables. As he got closer, he could hear music. He could hear people talking and laughing. He could smell good food. The harvest festival was already starting. When Fred reached the square, his eyes opened wide. Wow! It was so colorful and busy. There were stalls everywhere. Stalls with food. Stalls with games. Stalls with crafts. And stalls with fruits and vegetables. Many people were there. Children were running around and playing. Families were walking together, looking at the stalls. Farmers were standing proudly next to their vegetables and fruits. Everyone seemed happy and excited. Fred saw banners hanging across the square. The banners said "Welcome to the Harvest Festival" and "Celebrate the Harvest." They were bright and cheerful. He found a place to set down his baskets for a moment. "Phew," Fred said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "These are heavy." He looked around. He saw Mr. Green, the baker. Mr. Green was selling fresh bread and pies. They smelled delicious. He saw Mrs. Smith, the jam maker. Mrs. Smith had jars of colorful jams and jellies. They looked so sweet. He saw other farmers he knew. Farmer Joe was there with his big watermelons. Farmer Lily was there with her beautiful flowers. Everyone was showing off their best harvest. Fred felt a little bit shy. He had never really participated in the festival before. He felt a little nervous to show his vegetables. Were they good enough? Would people like them? But then he looked at his pumpkins again. They were so big and orange. He looked at his tomatoes. They were so red and shiny. He looked at his corn. It was so yellow and plump. He smiled. Yes, they were good. He had worked hard, and his harvest was good. He saw a sign that said "Harvest Competition, Enter Here." It pointed to a table with a judge sitting behind it. The judge was an older woman with kind eyes. She looked friendly. Fred took a deep breath. "Okay, Fred," he said to himself. "Let's do this." He picked up his baskets again and walked towards the competition table. It was time to enter his vegetables and fruits in the Harvest Festival competition. It was time to show everyone what the not-so-lazy farmer had grown. Fred walked to the table. The kind woman smiled at him. "Hello," she said. "Welcome to the harvest competition. Are you here to enter?" Fred nodded. He felt a little nervous, but he tried to smile back. "Yes," he said. I want to enter my vegetables." "Wonderful," said the woman. "What have you brought today?" Fred carefully lifted his baskets onto the table. First, He showed the pumpkins. "These are my pumpkins," he said. "I grew them myself." The woman looked at the pumpkins. She touched them. She knocked on them gently. "Very nice pumpkins," she said. "They are big and round. And a lovely color." Next, Fred showed his tomatoes. "And these are my tomatoes," he said. "Red and ripe." The woman picked up a tomato. She smelled it. She squeezed it softly. "Delicious," she said. "They smell so fresh. And they are a perfect red." Then, Fred showed his corn. "This is my corn," he said. "Sweet corn." The woman took an ear of corn. She peeled back the leaves. She looked at the kernels. "Beautiful corn," she said. "The kernels are so plump and yellow." Finally, Fred showed his green beans. "And these are my green beans," he said. "Long and straight." The woman looked at the green beans. She took one out of the bag. She bent it a little. "Excellent green beans," she said. "They are firm and crisp." The woman wrote something on a piece of paper. She looked up at Fred again. "These are all very good vegetables," she said. "You have done a wonderful job growing them. What's your name?" "My name is Fred," he said. "Well, Fred," said the woman, "you should be very proud of your harvest. Thank you for entering the competition. We will announce the winners later today. Please come back to hear the results." "Thank you," Fred said. He felt his cheeks get a little red. He was happy that the judge liked his vegetables. "Good luck, Fred," the woman called as he picked up his baskets. Fred smiled and walked away from the table. He felt much better now. The judge liked his vegetables. That was a good start. He still felt a little nervous about winning. But he was happy just to show his vegetables. He was happy to be part of the harvest festival. He put his baskets down at an empty stall. He wanted to walk around and see the rest of the festival. He wanted to listen to the music and smell the good food. He wanted to enjoy the day, no matter what happened in the competition. The judging was done. Now it was time to have fun. Chapter 8, A Little Less Lazy. Winter came, and Fred had enough food to eat. He was still a lazy farmer, yes. He still loved to sleep in and take naps in the afternoon. But something was different. He remembered the harvest festival and the tasty apple pie. He remembered the nice words from Farmer Green and Farmer Rose. Now, when Fred woke up in the morning, he would still yawn and stretch. But then, he would think about his farm. Maybe he would spend just 1 hour pulling weeds before his nap. Or maybe he would water his plants for a little while before sitting in his chair. He was still Fred, the lazy farmer. But he was also Fred, the farmer who learned that a little work can make his farm, and his life, a little bit better. And sometimes, when the sun was warm and the birds sang, Fred would even smile as he pulled a weed. Just a small smile, but it was there. And Anton the ant, watching from a sunflower, would smile too.